welcome to the Asia Briefing webinar series. Today we will be hearing from Mr. Alberto Vettoretti, Managing Partner of Dezan, Shira and Associates, Vietnam. He is here to present on entry channels for foreign investors doing business in Vietnam. Dezan, Shira and Associates is a specialist foreign direct investment practice providing corporate establishment, business advisory, tax advisory and compliance, accounting, payroll, due diligence, and financial review services to multinationals investing in emerging Asia. We are currently operating in 5 jurisdictions with offices in Vietnam, China, India, Hong Kong, and Singapore, as well as 2 liaison offices in Italy and the United States. Alberto will now begin.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Alberto Vettoretti. I'm the Managing Partner for Dezan, Shira and Associates in Vietnam. Today we will talk about entry channels for foreign investors doing business in Vietnam. So what foreign companies can use as an investment tool to do business in the country. Last year, in 2012, the number of foreign enterprises, only foreign enterprises, was over 70%. So this is actually the most widely used tool to do business in the country. Joint ventures are in the rise, but still represent slightly over 20% of the total. As far as laws and regulations are concerned, we will look primarily at 3 laws which dictate every issues related to establishment of companies in the country. Laws in Vietnam are not old. I think they were promulgated in 2005 and 2006, and they are also still currently being looked at by the government in order to make an even more attractive foreign investment scenarios in the country. So the law we're looking at is the law on enterprise, which specifies the nature of the entity. Specifically, we will be looking at limited liability companies, or LLCs, joint stock companies, JSC, partnerships company, or private enterprises. When we talk about the type of entity, then we need to refer to the law on it. And this mentions about joint ventures or 100% foreign-owned entities. There are also mentionings about various contractual forms, business cooperation contracts, BOT, BTO, and BT that we will look at later on. Last but not least, the commercial law also provides information for representative offices and branch offices in the country. So, what are my options when it comes to invest in Vietnam? We will briefly discuss about limited liability companies, joint stock companies, partnership companies, representative offices, branch offices, and other investment options that we have. Let's start with a limited liability company. This is a separate limited liability companies, and there are 2 types. It could be with 1 shareholder or multiple shareholders, either in form of foreign-owned enterprises or joint ventures. The number of investors cannot exceed 50, and they could be private individuals or companies and institutions. LLCs are not allowed to issue shares, and they also don't have a floor limit as far as charter capital is concerned. So there is no minimal requirement, and this is specified clearly in the charter of the company. The organization structure normally reflects the positions of the investors in the company. There is a member council and the chairman, a member council, which is the same as a general board of directors with its chairman. The member council also appoints a general director, which is supposed to look after the operations or the daily operations of the company. Having a board of supervision is optional and normally is implemented for companies that have more than 10 members. No regulations apply on the nationality and residency of the general directors and the other members' board. However, there are some limitations, at least on paper, on the residency requirements of the legal representative. Generally, the legal representative of the company is required to reside in Vietnam to oversee operations. After limited liability companies, we move into joint stock companies, which are used if you plan eventually for a larger project in the country and eventually if you plan to go public in future. So that the charter capital is composed of shares belonging to the funding shareholders in proportion to the capital they had subscribed initially. Again, there is no minimal requirement for the capital contributions, and the JSC is required to have a list 3 shareholder. This is a popular tool if you want eventually to list in the Vietnam Stock Exchange later on. However, it's not widely used on the day-to-day business operations by SMEs and international investors alike. After LLC and JSCs, we're looking now at partnership companies, which are used in a particular sector. Normally this is used in the architecture, for example, or consulting sector, where you have at least 2 individuals who are members of the partnerships and like co-owners of the same enterprise. And these persons normally are fully liable without any limit, as it is not a limited liability. However, the partnership can also consist of a limited liability member, which could be an individual or an organization, who could only contribute part of the capital and have, as a result, the liability and rights in the operation of the same company. We talk about separate legal entities. Now we move into representative offices and branch offices, which are not a legal entity on their own rights, but as we say, they are extensions of the business license of the investment company. Representative offices are still widely used in the country to conduct initial market research, to use as liaison offices with overseas parent company, and have other supporting roles. As the name says, they can only be representative and they cannot engage in directly generating business activity. Representative offices, and this is an interesting differences with other countries in the area, are not subject to tax in Vietnam and are also allowed to hire staff basically directly. The only requirements that you need to have to set up a rep office is you need to have a holding company. This needs to be registered for at least a year. You need to have a leasing contract in the country, and you can establish rep office in a pretty fast fashion. Branch offices is also a subsidiary of a parent company, so it's not a separate legal entity according to Vietnamese law. And unlike the representative office, the branch is allowed to conduct business activities in Vietnam, but this needs to be within the parent company's business scope. The only requirement is that the parent company must have been conducting business in its own country for at least 5 years. Last but not least, we do have other investment options if we want to conduct a business in Vietnam. These are normally used for larger projects, for infrastructure projects, and consists of business cooperation contracts, or BCC, which are typically signed between a foreign investor and the local company or the Vietnam government, and have as objective the jointly conduction of business operations in Vietnam. There are other forms of investment projects, and this could be under the form of build, operate and transfer contracts, or BOT, build, transfer, operate contracts, BTO, and build, transfer contracts, or BT. The difference between these contracts being at what point the title of the project is transferred over to the government, namely after the investor operates the projects, before the investor operates the projects, or immediately following completion of the same project.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Asia Briefing webinar series. If you have any questions about today's topics, please feel free to connect with Alberto Vettoretti at alberto.vettoretti@dezshira.com. For more information about business and regulatory news, please visit our website at www.asiabriefingmedia.com. Email us at podcast@asiabriefing.com. Follow us on our Twitter at Asia Briefing, or find us on Facebook. Finally, to help our listeners better understand the topic of doing business in Vietnam, Dezan, Shira & Associates publishes a host of helpful business guides, periodic magazines, and other business resources. This podcast was produced by Asia Briefing Media for Dezan, Shira & Associates. We hope that you can join us next time for our Asia Briefing webinar series.